Hello, I am Elder Small, and thank you for joining me today in this brief session wherein we will pick up where we left off at in our last session. In our last session, I spoke briefly about the Akan tribes and their spiritual traditions and culture. Again, this is a review of Chapter 5 of my book, You Deserve More. The title of Chapter 5 is Africa, Crucible of Consciousness. I think that before I get into this session, it's important to say that we are, in the textbook, we are acknowledged as or categorized as Homo sapiens sapiens, and life for the Homo sapiens sapien, according to anthropologists, geologists, evolutionists, historians, and more, life is said to have begun in Eastern Africa, on the continent of Africa, some 200 to 250,000 years ago. We know that beyond that, in general, life began on the continent of Africa as far back as 5 million years ago. And so if we are to understand who we are as human beings and our beginning, Africa is a good place to start. There was a time on this planet when everybody in the world were black people who lived on the continent of Africa. And so with that said, let's consider the Yoruba people and their spiritual traditions. Like the Akan, the Yoruba understand temporal life and life beyond death. Thus, Yoruba is described as a divine journey to the inner self, which is the intersection of the physical body, temporal reality, and the spiritual being, which is immortal reality. So temporal reality merges with immortal reality within our being, within ourselves. This simply means that the Yoruba understand that consciousness and the various dimensions of consciousness exists within and beyond our temporal existence, beyond our incarnation in this body. The Yoruba are African people whose history, like that of the Kemites, predates European imperialism and both the Old and New Testaments of the Bible. Their history includes a time when the Yoruba lived in ancient Kemet and periods of living in regions of East Africa before migrating to West Africa. Today, the Yoruba, they're centered in Nigeria, though, they, whether it be Brazil or the Caribbean or even the Americas in terms of the diaspora, the Yoruba are centralized in Nigeria. It is a region known to have been inhabited as far back as 65,000 BC. That is 65,000 years ago, wherein the early inhabitants were known as the Nok. The Yoruba visited the Nok between 2000 BC and 500 BC, where they settled and remain to this day. Much like Kemetic sacred science, the Yoruba believed themselves to be descended from goddesses and gods. Thus, integrated into their way of life is the importance of respect, honor, justice, and right living, as their goddesses and gods exist in the abode of consciousness as manifestations of Ase. Yoruba mythology tells us that Odumar gave Odu, a woman, control of the gods on the condition that she uses her power with care, calm, and discretion. Then Odu, out of love for her husband Omarilla, revealed to him the knowledge of divination so that humankind, men, women, and children, could communicate with the spirit realm. The spiritual beliefs of the Yoruba are they're embodied by Omarilla, who was known for his intelligence and his divine nature. He traveled the African continent, sharing wisdom and understanding with both prophets and sages. Thus, the story of his life and teachings are enshrined in Yoruba spiritual philosophies. Those who followed the teachings of Omarilla were compelled to strive towards a divine state of oneness. Oneness comes about when one's ori, that is, one's earthly consciousness, develops and elevates to the place of unification with one's aporni, which means heavenly consciousness. So one's earthly consciousness develops and elevates and unifies with one's heavenly consciousness. Oneness was the incubator for the principles of right living. As Omarilla taught, Iwi Pele, interpreted means divine and balanced character. Iwa Liwa, oneness with all things. And Iwa Ai, righteous living without regression. The culmination of these principles in one's life results in becoming a Igani Gandhi, which means transcendental human being. Furthermore, the Yoruba embrace a reverence for their ancestors, as the ancestors are standard bearers of what is moral and what is truthful concerning life. The Orishas do not necessarily dictate morality. It is the ancestors that dictate morality. The ancestors are the source of wisdom and guidance, inner strength, balance, and harmony. Ancestors are honored and respected not as gods, but as spirits and predecessors to who are next to the Creator. Among the Yoruba, reincarnation is an extension of the ancestral being, which is reflected in the Yoruba word tunde. Batunde, father returns. Yatunde, mother returns, are examples or recognition of the spiritual essence which, in part, returns to temporal life on earth. In the Yoruba tradition, birth, death, and rebirth are not so much about karma as it is about reliving morals and values. Unlike the yearning for enlightenment or realization in Indian mysticism, which aspires for enfoldment back into the creative source, the reincarnation of the ancestral soul to the earthly plane is desired in Yoruba spiritual culture. Reincarnation is seen as the vehicle for good ancestral souls to strengthen the lives and the spirits of their surviving descendants. The ancestors are deeply concerned about descendants and their adherence to the principles of creation, that is, divine and balanced character, oneness with all things, and righteousness without regression. These principles harmonize with the negative confessions of Ma'at, which govern Kimite cosmology. Inherent in the Yoruba principles of creation is the idea of judgment after death, which is akin to Kimite spiritual philosophy, wherein judgment takes place in the hall of Ma'at. As in Kemet, Yoruba believes that good souls, those who live morally, whose lives personify goodness, justice, righteousness, truth, love, etc., will go to live with relatives in a good place, while those who live cruel and abusive lives will end up in a bad place, never to return to the living. And so that's a kind of truncated, dwarfed overview, though probative, of Yoruba, of the Yoruba spiritual tradition. With that, let me say that Africa is the second largest continent on the planet. Likewise, it accounts for the second largest population. There are approximately 3,000 tribes and 2,000 languages and dialects on the continent. And even though Africans are separated by distance, languages, culture, and beliefs, there's a cultural or a culture of spiritual consciousness and an underlying unity, awareness, and understanding that that they are spiritual beings having a human experience. So far in this discussion, I have reflected on hieroglyphic inscriptions, cuneiform texts, mythology, oral traditions, and historical records that tell the story of the African presence on Earth dating back, conservatively speaking, at least 65,000 years. From North to South Africa, from West to East Africa, I have found that Africans are unified in the belief that human beings are souls or spirits. They are consciousness incarnated on Earth to evolve as physical beings to the highest levels of morality, oneness, and consciousness, and therefore achieve unity with all creation. Likewise, Africans believe in one divinity who manifests in various emanations, forms, elements, and aspects. They have a system of divination which augments the role of divine consciousness, or the role divine consciousness plays in their daily lives. As such, Africans are devoted to a state of mind that transcends the five senses and facilitates their interaction with non-physical states of consciousness. That is, ancestors, or an example is ancestors. And so I want to stop here. Next, I have to use one more session where we'll talk about, briefly talk about the Zulu, the Dogon, the Bantu, and then we should wrap up chapter 5. It's a good book. You might want to pick it up. And so in closing, let me say Dua, Hotep, Ashe, and may you be blessed with the greatest good and supreme intelligence.